All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest and land of Platte and Coffee, and this is David, and we're going to get on with the very first of the members area. This is the PacWest Bigfoot clan. This is the very first encounter story that I had in here for you, so just to let you know that this is a pretty special story to me, so I'm glad it's really actually close to home. It's about 30 miles away from me, so here we go. Farmer tells of lifelong Bigfoot encounters in Camas Valley, Oregon. I was about to be a third-generation farmer in Camas Valley when I first learned about the reality of Bigfoot. And, eventually, I was a full-time farmer when I would literally see it for myself. By the way, you live nearby, Dave, so I figured that was a good enough reason to share this experience with you. It was not a benign experience, but it did not end up with the death of me, thank goodness. So, just so you know, Bigfoot roam to and fro out here along the edges between the mountains and Camas Valley. Here is my experience and my almost face-to-face run-in with a Bigfoot. Camas Valley Bigfoot. Between summer and fall is when I keep my eyes peeled and my ears attuned to the night around the farm. Why? Well, that is simple. Bigfoot migrate or move through the area around that time of the year. Not only do they migrate through here, but they have for a lot longer than this third-generation farmer has been here. And even a few friends of mine, neighbors who are farmers, know this is a fact too. They just don't talk about it. And to top it off, we are the reason it is even easier for them to pass through and meander a bit longer around the area than they probably used to before. I will explain as I share my story with you. First, I wanted to share this. These animals are not as friendly as some would have us believe. They are animals, wild animals. Yes, I think they are more intelligent than others, but they are wild and unpredictable to say the least. I am constantly fighting off certain animals from my farm, of which I raise both a small herd of cattle and grow crops, pretty sizable crops at that. But these animals, you do not fight them off, as you'll come to learn. The only way to deal with them is to stand your ground and hope to the good Lord above they will simply move on and without any incident. Entering manhood. I was 16 years old when I heard my first Bigfoot. It was my dad who shared the reality that I would deal with later in my life that night. My birthday is in August, the tail end of it. And that night, I got another surprise. It was like some faint wail repeated over and over again. It came echoing off the mountains that lay due north of our farm. As a matter of fact, our farm, its property, literally ran up the hillside of those mountains. But that birthday would not end until after midnight, as I chatted with my dad about what was making these eerie sounds we listened to knelt by my bedroom window. Every few seconds or so, I remember the sound would start up, rise, and fall again, only to rinse and repeat itself. I was a bit unnerved, I remembered. Even a bit of a chill ran up my spine, to be honest. But my dad, he was, if Webster's had a definition for it, the epitome of the man's man. He showed no fear, but he did show concern about the new reality that was, to me, only myths moments before. He shared with me his own visual encounter. It was a shadow for the most part that seemed like a ghost moving through the trees. But he said it stopped long enough for him to know what it was. It was as if that Bigfoot wanted him to know what it was, he said. It was as if it wanted him to know they too had a claim to everything around them, to a part of everything that creation held. He told me not to be afraid, but he also stated he would be aware and ready at all times to guard ourselves against anything or anyone who would harm me or my family. He was not worried about them harming us, but he was worried about the farm, and given the fact there was, and I quote, a wildness about them, he had said, they should not be trusted. He was wrong about one thing. They are dangerous. They are not docile passengers through the night. They are wild and, well, highly unpredictable. That birthday would be one of nearly four that would bring me to my knees by my window in late August, early September, listening to the wails upon the wind in Camas Valley. All grown up. Today I am a third-generation farmer in Camas Valley, and recently, as 4 years ago, my mother passed away and my dad a couple years before that. I guess they really could not live one without the other. But after we put my mother to rest, we took the life insurance monies and basically rebuilt the house and invested in some newer farm equipment that was much needed by that point. I married, we have 2 children, and attend the local church every Sunday for worship and the Word. Life had turned out pretty, well, blessed. But for a while there, actually just a few occasions on the farm, it got both hairy and scary, and the puns are intended, Dave. It started back in 2001 when I took over the farm. I had moved back home to Camas Valley and my wife and the first of what would be 2 children. We lived with my mother and father as the house had plenty of space and rooms and they needed the assistance. Every day chores were too hard on my dad anymore, and my mother, well, she was also the epitome of motherhood. Some things today's world seems to be missing more and more. Great and caring parents. But it started with my wife, actually. She is the one to hear upon our return to the valley the ghost-like vocalizations from the mountains and my childhood. She woke me in the middle of the night, and yes, this was the tail end of August and happened twice in September that year. But she woke me feeling a bit freaked out at the sound. I decided, since she seemed to be wide awake and up for it, so I told her what I knew. She listened as I relayed the stories to her of where the sounds came from and what my dad had seen that day. Of course, she was a bit skeptical at first, but as I finished the stories, another wail came floating through the window we now sat by. She was a bit concerned after that, and especially with being out on the property alone. I don't blame her. These things, we would find out soon enough, were rather scary and intimidating. It ran and it ran. Late September, and the wailing happened again. This time I listened intently as my wife slept. There was no reason to wake her and have her any more concerned about Bigfoot than her and I were already. It was not a few days later, we were out in the fields, when I spotted a Bigfoot for the very first time. It was pure happenstance that I was there at that moment. That day, I was in the furthest field of the property, out near the foothill that led upward to the mountains beyond. I was actually just repairing some fence some deer had been messing with, trying to get over when I saw it. I was taking a water break and looking up towards the hillside when, from the east to the west, through an open area, massive, dark in color body ran from one side to the other. And yes, I mean a body, human-like shape, much bigger, just ran from one side of the tree line and disappeared into another. It was fast, and those strides, even from that distance, I could see how long they had to be. I dropped everything and stepped out into the open myself. Next thing I noticed was it popped out on the other side and ran across yet another open area and melted into yet another tree line. It was just running and running. I headed back to the house to tell my wife what I'd seen, and I wanted to head up there and see if I could find some sign or see closer what that thing was, although I knew in my heart and my mind what it was. But the wife would have none of it. I listened to her, however, even though a part of me was screaming to go out there. I was kind of glad I did not. A few days later, it was exactly September 22nd, as I remember that day specifically because my wife told me she was pregnant again. And I found a mauled cow in the backfields. Yeah, all of this in one day. Dead cow and possums everywhere. I've had a cougar once get a sheep from us, but this was nothing like that. A mountain lion chews and tears with the mouth and claws. This cow was literally torn apart. It was as if something just picked it up and started tearing parts of it clean off. It was quite the macabre scene. The innards were missing, the head barely attached, and 2 legs were missing, one laying a few feet away and one still mostly attached. It was one of our cows, a milking cow we used to bottle the raw milk and sell locally. It was time to do a little walk around the property and do a bit of hunting up the mountainside after that. I told my wife. She was concerned, but like me, she believed it was a cougar with new habits of tearing apart its food. Either way, it needed to be taken down or scared off if possible. I love animals, but I do not like losing money and have my product taken at will. Nobody does. So the hunt was on all day and afternoon. It was getting dark before the craziness set in. Possums. Possum parts. Half a possum. One possum I found dead hanging in a pine tree about 7 to 8 feet off the ground. I had come past the tree line along the hillsides into a heavily grown group of trees when I found them. Like my cow, they had been ripped to shreds and looked half-eaten. A creepy feeling and thought started to make its way through me all of a sudden. Bigfoot. What if this was all part of a hunt? In my mind, I just knew I was right, and a moment later, that guess, that feeling, and that fear were realized. Slowly, I had the sense to look up the mountainside. I do not know why, other than the good Lord guiding me, but I looked up to see a dark, shadowy figure, almost a roasted cinnamon in color, swaying in and out from behind a tree, not 30 to 40 yards ahead of me up the hill. It was huge, that was for sure. My heart raced, and soon enough, my feet followed suit. I ran as fast as I could, only slowing down here and there to see what was behind me. By the time I hit the back of my fields and property, I stopped, looked back up the mountain, and heard the wailing begin. Again. I did not stop running until I hit the back porch and practically landed in the kitchen, startling my wife. I told her everything over dinner after I'd calmed down. Of course, while eating, I kept the gruesome descriptions to a minimum. But that night, we heard the wailing, and on and off, and found ourselves less scared, to be honest, and instead becoming more fascinated. I started a bit of research after that. Children of the Corn. I talked to my uncle who lived way up north, the North Umpqua River, about 4 or 5 miles past Glide. I asked him specifically about growing up on the farm and what was really afoot there. His story was amazing, and later on, around this December, I'll share it with you as well, Dave. But what I learned, and I will keep the detailed experiences to myself for now, but what I had come to learn was this was truly a reoccurring thing, and has been for many, many years, heck, decades. My wife and I did keep about us a healthy respect for these things. During hunting season, I kept myself out of the woods behind my property as more dead animals like deer, more possum, and even a raccoon were found on the outskirts of the property, all of them missing parts and literally ripped apart. The wailing continued a few more times, but we learned that they do eat meat, and we started to wonder if we were on that menu ourselves. That was just a thought, one that I do not totally agree with today, however. It was October when the last of that year's visitations would come to a head. I would also come face to face with one of these things, and even now it makes me literally shudder at the memory. Most everything was done. Harvesting was even coming to an end, and preparations for the winter and next year were underway. We even unloaded all the pumpkins we had in a small patch to a nearby store. It was actually a record-breaking year financially. That evening, when I finished up and headed back to the house, I stopped and turned around to listen to the wailing suddenly coming down off the hillsides. And I was dumb enough at that time to start wandering in the direction I believed the sound was originating from. Doing my own little research, I suppose. I hiked up about 50 or so yards into the tree line before I realized that I was now hearing whistling and a nasty, rough grunt. I was suddenly aware of my situation. No gun, nothing to defend myself with, and now I was hearing all of this around me. There was again a whistle up ahead of me, and then a grunt almost directly behind me. I felt I was suddenly, being herded, or surrounded at least. I turned to my right and heard nothing. I turned to my left, and suddenly that grunting started up. I felt they wanted me to continue going right in my bones. So instead, I continued left. The grunting picked up and became rather intense, the whistling too. I darted as quickly as I could downhill towards the farm, but not before I got an eyeful of a Bigfoot. Shaking trees. It was shaking trees that caught my attention. There were 2 of them shaking wildly out of the corner of my eyes. As I looked, I could see a monster of a thing standing in between them, its hands gripping both, just grunting, growling, and shaking each one as if they were toothpicks. This one was dark brown in color. Its face was long and narrow with a skin color that almost matched the tone of the hair. It was, however, scary looking and had no hair around the forehead, eyes, and the mouth. It really was a beast of a thing, and those shoulders, they were massive. It probably could have just pulled those trees right out of the ground. Its arms had to be extremely long. There was a distance of at least 7 feet between those trees, and that thing's arms were still bent some. They were powerful as well. The Bigfoot was shaking them madly. It suddenly let the trees go, looked at me, and just contorted its face in a fashion that literally had me fearing for my life and ready to pee myself. Then it screamed. It was so loud my wife heard it, and as I stood there, not 2 seconds later, that Bigfoot and I looked off towards the property as we suddenly heard a gunshot. I ran off so fast I barely realized it was gone before my heart and my breathing could catch up with the fear that was still whirling around inside of me. But I mustered up and got my wits about me and ran back down the hillside. I have to tell you, that scream had me dazed. So much so, I almost ran into a couple of trees myself on the way back and just shaking my head and grabbing my ears. That sound, it kind of hurt. The farm. It's been a while, and the only thing we've noticed since that day has been a few screams and some wailing that continues from summer to late fall here and there. Personally, I think they pass through from the coastal region to the valley and mountains that surround the land of the Umpqua Forest and River. But that is my personal belief. I also think this small clan lives here during those times and runs the gamut of the Camas Valley and the Callahan Mountain Range. Either way, we try to avoid heading out in the woods even during hunting season, and at that point, I'm hunting elsewhere. But that is our encounter story. Thanks, Reese.